For 6 months, Claire Whitfield let the two people she trusted most believe she was blind. She wasn't. She just needed them to think she was. Every morning she woke up in a house that no longer felt like her own, put on a pair of dark glasses, and walked into rooms pretending the world in front of her was nothing but shadow and sound. Her husband held her hand a little too carefully. Her best friend spoke a little too slowly, the way people do when they think someone can no longer see their face. Claire let them believe it. She smiled at jokes she wasn't supposed to understand, and she said nothing, because saying nothing was the only way she was ever going to learn the truth. What she saw during those 6 months would end a marriage, a friendship, and, for one of them, a career. A folder slammed onto a marble table, a gasp that came out before anyone could stop it, a chair scraping back so fast it nearly tipped over. Nobody in that room expected the evening to end the way it did, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why she let it happen. You'll understand what she had to give up to get there, what she risked every single day she kept the glasses on, and what finally made her decide that the truth was worth more than the comfort of staying hidden. This is the story of the wife who chose to go blind on purpose. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Claire Whitfield was not a woman who lied easily. People who knew her before that year described her as direct, almost blunt, the kind of person who would rather say an uncomfortable truth out loud than let it sit quietly in a room. She had built a career in interior design, the kind of career that depended on trusting her own eyes, on noticing the smallest details other people walked past without a second glance. She noticed the way light hit a room in the afternoon. She noticed when a color was half a shade too warm. That eye for detail, the one she had spent 15 years sharpening, was about to become the most important tool she had ever used, except this time it wouldn't be pointed at a room. It would be pointed at her own marriage. It started, as these things often do, with something ordinary. A minor car accident on a wet road in early spring left Claire with a concussion, a fractured wrist, and a temporary loss of vision in her left eye caused by swelling behind the retina. Doctors told her it was almost certainly reversible, that the blurring and the dark patches would fade within a matter of weeks as the inflammation went down. For nearly a month, that is exactly what happened. Her sight in that eye came back gradually, first as light and shadow, then as blurred shapes, then, one morning in early April, almost completely clear. Claire sat on the edge of her bed, blinked twice, and said nothing to anyone. She did not tell her husband. She did not tell her best friend. She simply kept wearing the glasses. The decision to stay quiet did not come from cruelty. It came from something she had noticed in the weeks leading up to the accident. Small things she had brushed aside because naming them felt paranoid. Her husband, Daniel Whitfield, had started taking calls in the garage with the door shut. Her closest friend, Emily Carter, had started arriving at the house earlier than planned, always with an excuse, always a little too composed. Claire had chalked it up to stress, to busy schedules, to nothing at all. But once the accident happened, once the world assumed she could no longer see clearly, she noticed something else. The two of them relaxed around her in a way they hadn't in months. And that relief, more than any single piece of evidence, was the first real thing that made her want to know why. Pretending to be blind is harder than it sounds, and Claire spent the first few weeks simply learning how to do it convincingly. She practiced walking with her hands slightly extended, memorized the layout of every room so she never bumped into furniture she was supposed to no longer see. She learned to angle her head toward sound rather than sight, to let silence stretch a beat longer than felt natural, because sighted people fill silence too quickly. She asked Daniel to describe things to her, the color of a tie, the expression on a waiter's face, small requests that gave her cover while also giving her information about what he chose to notice and what he chose to leave out. Every conversation became a test. Every unnecessary detail he offered, every detail he conveniently forgot to mention, became a piece of a picture she was slowly assembling in private. The first real clue came on an ordinary Tuesday evening, 3 weeks into the deception. Emily had come over for dinner, as she often did, and at one point excused herself to take a phone call in the hallway. Claire, sitting at the table with her glasses on and her head turned toward the window as if watching nothing at all, listened. Emily's voice dropped low, almost a whisper, and though Claire couldn't make out every word, she caught 2 things clearly: a name and the word tonight. When Emily returned to the table, she apologized, said it was a work emergency, and reached for her wine glass with a hand that was not quite steady. Claire smiled in the direction of the sound and said it was no trouble at all. Inside, something had shifted, quietly, permanently, and there was no undoing it now. Over the following weeks, Claire began keeping a private record, nothing elaborate, just a small notebook she kept in a drawer. Only she opened, where she wrote down times, phrases, patterns. Daniel's late nights at the office increased, always with a reasonable explanation attached: a project deadline, a client dinner, a meeting that ran long. Emily's visits to the house grew more frequent whenever Daniel happened to be working from home. On their own, none of these details would have meant much. Together, written down in one place, dated and timed, they began to form a shape Claire recognized, but did not want to admit she recognized. She kept writing anyway. She told herself she was simply gathering facts, the way she gathered measurements before starting a design, because facts, unlike feelings, could not be argued with later. Claire arranged to be dropped off early from what was supposed to be a support group meeting for people adjusting to vision loss, a meeting Daniel believed she attended weekly. Instead, she had the driver let her out 2 blocks from the house and walk the rest of the way herself, counting her steps, moving slowly enough that anyone watching would have believed she genuinely needed the extra care. She let herself in through the side door. From the kitchen, she heard voices in the living room, Daniel's and Emily's, low and familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. She stood in the hallway, glasses still on, and listened to her husband tell her best friend that Claire still had no idea, and that they needed to be more careful, not because anyone suspected anything, but because they had gotten comfortable. Claire could have confronted them that night. Every instinct told her to. Instead, she walked quietly back out the way she came, waited 20 minutes on the corner, and had the driver bring her home the normal way, glasses on, cane in hand, as if nothing at all had happened. The decision to stay silent a little longer was not about weakness. It was about leverage. Claire understood that the moment she revealed what she knew, both Daniel and Emily would have time to prepare a version of events, to soften the truth, to explain it away. She wanted more than an explanation. She wanted proof so complete that neither of them could talk their way around it. So she kept the glasses on, she kept listening, and she began planning exactly how and where she would let them see her see them. Over the following 2 months, Claire's private investigation became more deliberate. She began saving text messages Daniel left visible on shared devices, screenshots she claimed were accidental when in fact they were not. She noted dates that matched supposed work trips against hotel confirmations that appeared briefly on a shared email account before being deleted. She spoke to a colleague of Daniel's, casually, carefully, framing her questions as harmless curiosity about his workload, and learned that at least 2 of his recent late nights corresponded with evenings the office had been empty since 6. Piece by piece, the folder in her desk drawer grew heavier. She was no longer collecting suspicions. She was building a case, methodical and complete, the same way she once approached a difficult client who doubted her instincts and needed to be shown, not told, exactly what she saw. What made the situation more complicated and ultimately more damaging was Emily's position. She did not simply work in the same industry as Daniel. She worked directly alongside him on a project that placed the two of them together for long stretches of the week under the reasonable cover of professional obligation. It meant every late night had a built-in excuse. It also meant that when the truth eventually surfaced, it would not stay contained to the marriage. Emily's professional reputation, built carefully over a decade, was tied to her closeness with Daniel and to the trust of colleagues who had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. Claire understood this. She understood that when she finally chose to reveal what she had gathered, the damage would not stop at her own front door. It would follow Emily into every room she walked into after that. Claire chose the dinner deliberately. It was meant to celebrate Daniel's recent promotion, a small gathering at their own dining table with Emily present, exactly the kind of evening the two of them had grown used to feeling safe inside. Claire wore her glasses as always. She let Daniel pour her wine. She let Emily tell a story that made the table laugh. A story Claire could not see the punchline of, or so they believed. Underneath the table, in a folder she had carried in earlier that afternoon and hidden beneath a stack of napkins, sat every piece of evidence she had gathered over 6 months. Messages, photographs, hotel records, dates. She had rehearsed nothing about what she would say. She had only decided when. And as the laughter around the table began to fade, Claire reached for the folder. She set the folder on the table, removed her glasses slowly, and looked directly at both of them for the first time in 6 months. The silence that followed was immediate and total. Daniel's smile did not fade so much as collapse. Emily's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Claire opened the folder and, without raising her voice, began reading dates aloud. Dates that matched supposed work trips. Dates that matched deleted messages. Dates that matched a conversation she had overheard from a hallway they assumed was empty. Daniel reached for the folder and Claire slid it back toward herself. It was Emily who finally spoke, asking, almost pleading, how long Claire had known. Claire answered simply, long enough to be certain, long enough to stop guessing, long enough to watch you both relax around a woman you thought could no longer see either of you clearly. What followed happened quickly. Daniel left the table first, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, insisting they could talk about this privately, later, calmly. Claire told him there was nothing left to discuss privately that hadn't already happened publicly in her own house for months. Emily left minutes later, her composure gone, her apology unfinished, unable to meet Claire's eyes even though Claire had spent half a year unable, in their minds, to meet anyone's eyes at all. Within weeks, Claire filed for divorce, citing the evidence she had assembled with the same patience she once reserved for design proposals. Emily's professional relationship with Daniel's company became impossible to maintain once details of the affair became known among colleagues who valued Claire's long-standing presence in their social circle far more than either of them had anticipated. Claire never described what she did as revenge, not publicly, and not privately either. Friends who spoke with her afterward said she described it more as necessity, a way of protecting herself from being lied to twice, once by the affair itself, and again by whatever careful, half-true version of events Daniel and Emily might have offered had she confronted them without proof. The 6 months cost her something too. She spent half a year isolated inside her own home, performing a version of herself that made her smaller, quieter, more dependent than she had ever allowed herself to be. She missed real conversations because she was always half-performing one. She lost time with people who genuinely believed she needed help she didn't need. That cost, she said later, was the hardest part to explain to anyone who hadn't lived inside a lie of their own making. Daniel moved out within a month of the dinner and, according to people close to the family, struggled for over a year to rebuild both his personal reputation and his standing at work, where colleagues had quietly begun treating him differently once the story made its way through the office. Emily left the company entirely 8 months later, taking a position in another city. one where fewer people knew the details of what had happened at that dinner table. Claire kept the house. She kept her career, which had never depended on either of them to begin with. And she kept, tucked away in a drawer she rarely opened anymore, the notebook where it had all started. 6 months of careful, quiet observation, written by a woman everyone in the room believed could no longer see them at all. Claire Whitfield never set out to become a story people told at dinner parties, the woman who pretended to be blind to catch her husband and her best friend. She simply refused to be lied to without first understanding exactly how deep that lie went. What she proved, in the end, was not just that she had been betrayed. It was that patience, quiet and deliberate, can uncover a truth no confrontation ever could. She did not raise her voice once during those 6 months. She did not need to. By the time she finally removed her glasses, she had already seen everything she needed to see, and everyone at that table understood, in that single, silent moment, that she always had. If you were in Claire's position, could you have kept the act going for 6 months? Or would you have confronted them the moment you suspected something? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. If this story kept you hooked until the end, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next one.